Please welcome your 2021 TFA finalists.
Hello, everybody. Getting excited, right? Is everybody excited to hear from our Templeton Freedom Award finalists? How cool is this? I am so excited, and I love the energy in the room right now, and I hope that you are just looking forward to learning from this fantastic group of individuals up here. We agreed as a group that this is going to be a killer session, so get ready. We manifested it. It's happening, so get pumped. If I seem a little bit more giddy than usual, I wanted to mention that this is actually sort of a historic career moment for me. I've been doing this panel for 5 years now. A long time. Don't ask me why they keep bringing me back. But it's my 5th one, and for the first time ever, we have a fellow woman on stage virtually with me. So, fellow CEO, she's a CEO too, nonetheless. So we're so excited. Baishali Bomjan in the Women's Economic Rights panel yesterday mentioned, only 21% of our network is led by a female head of org. So just incredible to have Lakshmi here with us today, joining us from India. So if you're not, thank you, Lakshmi. So if you're not familiar with our Templeton Freedom Award program, let me just give you a little bit of context. This is a $270,000 annual awards program that is generously sponsored by the Templeton Religion Trust. It supports regional awards around the world every year, and then the big prize is our $100,000 Templeton Freedom Award, which these 6 organizations are competing for today. That winner will be announced tonight at the Lone Depot Park, and I hope that you're looking forward to that incredible announcement and celebrating all of the accomplishments of these amazing organizations. This is really one of the coolest programs that we have the privilege of running at Atlas Network. We get to engage with, about 100 applications every year. So this is really quite an esteemed group you see. It's really been narrowed down, and we've gotten to know them over the past, 8 months since our application process began. So thank you all for being here. So this is not, in my colleague Alex Cordell's word, this is not your grandma's interview or your grandma's panel. We've got 6 people in only 45 minutes. So this is gonna have to be nice and punchy. So we're excited about that. So here's how it'll work. I'll do quick intros. Bios are on the app. So if you'd like to learn more about our panelists, please check that out. And then we'll just sort of go down the line, and all of our panelists will give you a 1-minute description of why the heck they're on stage, why we're so excited to have them here, and then we'll jump into a conversation together. Okay, so first, to my left, we've got Aimable Manirakiza, CEO of the Center for Development and Enterprises Great Lakes, based in Burundi. Welcome, Aimable.
Thank you so much, Casey.
We've also got Clark Neily, the Senior Vice President for Legal Studies from the Cato Institute, based in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Clark.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Next, we have Michael Melendez. He's the Executive Vice President at Libertas Institute in Utah. Welcome, Michael. So happy to have you here.
Thank you, Rob.
And we've got the troublesome Mark Littlewood. He's gonna keep this spicy today, I can just tell. Mark Littlewood, Director of the IEA in London. Welcome. And finally, Garrett Ballengee, Executive Director of the Cardinal Institute for West Virginia Policy in West Virginia. Welcome, Garrett. We're so happy to have you. So I feel obliged to make a quick confession before we dive in, which is I am a fellow, and we also have Lakshmi Goyal. Oh, here she is, right behind us here. There she is. So we've got Lakshmi Goyal. She is the CEO of the Center for Civil Society based in India. We wish so much that she could be here with us today, but she'll be here next year. We cannot wait. Okay, so I feel obliged to make a quick confession, which is I am a fellow West Virginian, so there might be some whispering that I'm biased here. So I think, Garrett, what we'll do is I could just ask you the hardest questions, just to make sure that everybody feels comfortable. What do you think about that?
Let's go for it.
Good with that? Okay. I think that's what we'll do. Okay, so let's get started. We'll go right down the line. Why don't we start with Lakshmi from the Center for Civil Society. Lakshmi, give us your 1-minute project description. Why are you on the stage with us today?
Thank you so much, Casey. And I think more than anything, it's my good fortune that I'm in this company of such esteemed panelists. So a very quick description of the project and that Center for Civil Society has actually been pursuing for over a decade now. And this is perhaps one of those golden moments. So this is on the street vendors. And I think the best description of how important street vendors are for India is captured in Arjun Appadurai's quote of 1987, where he basically says that in India, the street is actually a stage that rarely sleeps. That's where India eats, sleeps, moves, celebrates, and worships. So in India, approximately 12 million people, and largely the urban poor, actually rely on street vending for livelihood. And it generates a daily turnover of over $10 million a day. Now, by making goods and services available at doorsteps and at places that are conveniently located, they are actually reducing the transaction costs for everyday purchase. And therefore, street vendors actually have a huge role to play in the reducing the cost of living for urban cities. For India, culturally, they're also very precious because the famous Indian street food and the chai walas, etc., actually sustain a large part of the working middle class and the low middle class across cities in India. Now, unfortunately, the economic and property rights are often at the risk of abuse from government authorities, and vendors are constantly under threat of eviction, seizure of goods, etc. And for over a decade, Center for Civil Society has actually been championing for their economic freedom and their right to earn a dignified livelihood through legislation, as well as actually shifting the perception from street vendors being public nuisance to them being recognized as public service providers. And this has been through a combination of research, advocacy, outreach, representation to government, and a lot of legislative work. And we could, of course, talk more about it as we go through the session today.
Thank you so much, Lakshmi, and thanks for being with us all the way from India. Okay, we'll start with Garrett now. Give us your description.
So when I say the words West Virginia, just take a second. What images conjure up? It's probably not opportunity. It's probably not wealth. It's probably not a society that traditionally has functioned overly well over the last 100 years. And so Cardinal's mission, when it viewed the landscape in West Virginia, what is the central piece of that puzzle? How do we turn West Virginia around? To us, it was quite clear we had to turn West Virginia's education system from one centered on adults in a system to one centered on kids. And so over the last 5 or 6 years, Cardinal embarked on a journey to essentially give education freedom to every child in that state. And so earlier this year, after years of hard work and research and meetings and coalition discussions and all the fun teacher strikes and things like that we went through, earlier this year, West Virginia passed the most expansive school choice program in the country's history. 93% of kids in West Virginia will be eligible in 2022 for what we call the Hope Scholarship, which is a form of education savings account. So we are excited to be here, and thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, Garrett. Great stuff. Okay, Mark, take it away.
Well, Casey, I think it was Ronald Reagan who said that there are no easy solutions, but there are simple solutions. And so the task of the IEA has been to try and make sure that Brexit leads to a very simple solution, namely that the United Kingdom becomes the greatest free trading nation on the planet. And we at the IEA have done a number of things to bring that about. We have reiterated the general case for free trade. I think that most British people get that. Most British people are in favour of free trade, but there are no final victories in the battle of ideas. We've had to reiterate that case. Crucially, I think we had a major insight. Shankar Singham, sitting at the table at the front here, he wrote a document we released called Plan A+. At the time where Brexit was tearing our nation apart, we actually mapped out a way in which the United Kingdom could leave the EU but be a liberal free trading nation. And the insight was this: in order to do so, you needed full control of your regulatory handbook. You couldn't hand that over to somebody else. You needed to sit around the table and control it yourself. And we needed, I was going to say, to pick up some muscle memory, but we didn't really have any muscle memory about free trade because we hadn't done any trade negotiations for 40 years, so we needed to build up those muscles. And without that intervention by the Institute of Economic Affairs, I think Britain probably wouldn't have an independent trade policy at all. And the early signs are good. We've signed more than 60 trade deals. We're making some unilateral decisions about facilitating trade, getting rid of tariffs. And my hope is that we are now on the right path and the right trajectory. And that in years to come, I hope within a decade, the United Kingdom will have free trade arrangements with a higher proportion of world GDP than any other country on the planet. I think that's something to celebrate and something to strive for.
Pretty incredible stuff. Thanks, Mark. Okay. Now we'll move right on to Libertas with Michael.
So at Libertas, we have been focusing on unleashing the ingenuity of entrepreneurs and innovators in Utah and around the country. So let me try to paint you a little bit of a picture of the wonkery that is a regulatory sandbox. Think about the Wright brothers testing out their planes in the sand dunes of North Carolina. Think about in the Bonneville Salt Flats out in Utah, people attaching rocket engines to vehicles and testing out the engines that we have in our planes today. Or these new vehicles into space being tested out in the middle of the desert, and now we're actually going out into space again. And now we're trying to bring that kind of innovation into the regulatory sphere, creating a legal tool whereby innovators can actually work with regulators to temporarily suspend different laws and regulations that are preventing them from actually going out and solving the world's problems and bringing about the new age of humanity.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. And now on to Clark from Cato Institute.
Thank you. It may come as a surprise to some people in this room, but America is the most punitive country in the world. We have 5% of the world's population, but 25% of its prisoners. We incarcerate our fellow citizens at a higher rate than any other country in the world, and not by a little bit. We have 3 times the incarceration rate of Great Britain and 6 times the incarceration rate of Canada. It's not something to be proud of. We have a number of pathologies in our criminal justice system, and the murder of George Floyd by police officers in Minneapolis a year and a half ago exposed one of the most significant, and that is the lack of accountability. We clothe police officers with extraordinary power and discretion in this country, and what comes with that, unfortunately, is a policy of near zero accountability. There is a perception by people who have regular interaction with police that their rights may be violated with near impunity by police. That perception is completely accurate, and the cornerstone of our near zero accountability policy for police in America is a legal doctrine called qualified immunity that the courts have invented to essentially let police off the hook when they violate people's rights. So Cato launched its campaign to eliminate qualified immunity 4 years ago, and now we are having a raging national dialogue about this formerly obscure legal term called qualified immunity, and we will not rest until it has been eliminated.
Thank you, Clark. Love that energy from the room here. Okay, and finally, Aimable and Manirakiza, please tell us about your work.
Thank you so much. I'm from Burundi, and Burundi is one the least economically free in the according the Economic Freedom Index or doing business. So due to this situation, Burundi have created no tariff barriers, monopoly in different sectors because these big governments have created such barriers to in Burundi, we have see restriction in movement of people and goods, and this situation have created many problems for trade in Burundi, between Burundi and neighbors countries, where we have seen harassment, sexual harassment for cross-border traders, but also high-level costs to trade between Burundi and neighbors countries, and a lot of process created by bureaucracy in my country. So this situation have created Burundi another level in terms of a big country where it's very hard to live. So according to the situation, CDE team have see this is not solution for our country, which is very poor in the world, because there are a group of people try to monopolize violence to make so hard our life through trade. So CDE have created a campaign called Fungua Njia, is a local language Kiswahili, which means open road. Through this program, these projects, CDE team have tried to mobilize, to raise public about this issue, how free trade can help most of the people in Burundi to get out of poverty through free trade. So.
Thank you, Aimable. So I hope that you understand now why I feel so honored to even just be in proximity with these individuals and the important, just crucial work that they're doing to bring dignity to people around the world. So one thing that stands out to me when we look at this panel is, you know, we've got Center for Civil Society, this very well-established group in India. We've got the IEA, one of the longest-standing think tanks in our entire network. And then we've got some startup groups, too. We've got the Cato Institute, obviously, is a longer-term organization. But then we've got CDE, Great Lakes, which was just founded, I think, in 2015, 2016, and then the Cardinal Institute, very similar timeline. Libertas, again, just less than 10 years, I think, which is pretty incredible. So if you're wondering, you know, if you have to be a Cato Institute to get up here on stage, I don't think that's really true. So I hope that you can learn from this group today. And another thing that stands out is that some of these projects really required long-term and sort of staying the course. So I think I want to start with Lakshmi and talk about, just if you could talk to us a little bit about what that looked like in India for you, where, you know, the Street Vendors Act, it was passed, you know, all of 34 million people's working lives were legalized, but then it didn't get implemented in the States. So how did you hold the government accountable and kind of stay the course there?
Yeah, thank you, Casey. And actually, it was really a pleasure to kind of hear the fellow finalists describe their kind of freedom movement that they are kind of, you know, pursuing, and really, really wonderful to hear so much energy being put into it. So, you know, one of the aspects of what you mentioned about it being a long haul is entirely true. The Street Vendor Act, it was actually passed in 2014 in India. And the passage of that act typically should have meant that we finished all our work and we could just kind of rest easy. But fact of the matter is that there are quite a few gaps in the implementation of the act, and one of which you rightly outlined, is that while the act may stay on paper, there is definitely the gap in the implementation from the states. The second bit is also the fact that because it is about vendors being largely unaware of their rights, and public officials not being held accountable for the harassment, there is actually, in principle, there is an act, but there is really, in practice, nothing that is universally applicable. Now, we have at Center for Civil Society been pursuing both these aspects quite diligently, and I would say strategically. And that word strategically is very important, because if you look at the existence of an act and you say, what is it that's coming in the way of it not being implemented at the state level, it's because the bureaucrats are the ones who are responsible for its implementation. And here, the ones who are responsible for implementation are the ones you're going to go up against, because they are the ones who are harassing the street vendors. And so it's a bit of the approach of marginal revolution, the chipping away at the problem. And I think the other aspect is that we definitely had the support of the town vending committees, which were essentially expected to give some sort of a participatory weight to the street vendors. And that again comes as a double-edged sword, because while they do kind of form that coalition that can lend a voice to street vendors, but they also develop their own ambition, their own political ambitions, and they have their own reasons for why they would pursue or not pursue, and they would very much want the street vendors to stay dependent on them. So a lot of the Center for Civil Society's work, apart from the legislative support and legal aid, has also been to reach directly to the beneficiaries, to tell them by the way of videos and through other outreach mechanisms what the rights are, and also kind of make use of technology as we go along.
Yeah, so important to ensure that people are aware of the rights. When a law changes, that can be a big disconnect and a challenge for us as civil society organizations. So I think I'll turn to Mark here, because you mentioned sort of like you hadn't flexed the trade muscles in a while at the IEA, but of course you had some basis in doing some work on that, and you'd worked for a long time to establish the IEA as this credible source. And it was sort of, the political moment made it happen, right? So can you talk a little bit about how ideas and politics, sort of when they come together, what do you do? How do you react?
Casey, that's a great question, because obviously think tanks and our movement are involved in the ideas business, not the electoral politics business. But you know what? There's an overlap. And what I learned most from the work that we did on free trade was clearly we had a back catalogue of all of the arguments for free trade and why it benefits both parties. And it's one of the few things in economics which is both counterintuitive but universally accepted by anybody that studies it. But the lesson I took away from this was that the world won't wait for you. And it reminded me of when I was at university and I asked my professor, what career should I go into? And he said, well, Mark, you could be an academic. An academic takes an infinite amount of time to find the perfect answer. Or alternatively, you could be a management consultant who has to find the best answer they can within a very specified amount of time. And I think what the IEA did very well in terms of finding a way through the Brexit constitutional mess was realizing that the world wouldn't wait for us, that we had to get something out now. We were not on our own timetable, we were on the timetable of unfolding events, and I think that's what really gave us impact. And I would take that away as a lesson the IEA is going to learn in future. You need to intervene when the world is ready, not when you are.
Thanks so much, Mark. That gets me to think about the project with the Cato Institute, actually, Clark. So can you talk, do you relate to that? Kind of, do you have anything to add when it comes to sort of the political moment and having the ideas ready to go?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. You have to drive change. Public confidence in police has been hovering at the lowest ever measured. And, the protests that we saw spilling out into the streets over the last couple of years, despite the fact that they've certainly, past the bounds of what's a legitimate peaceful protest, they're expressing a genuine feeling. And we can't hope that it gets better. We can't wait for it to get better. We have to help that feeling get better. I remember when I first came over to Cato 4.5 years ago to take over the criminal justice program, I had an intern from Moldova, and I asked her, what perceptions do they have in Moldova? What were you told by people who'd been here before? She said, what I was told is you have to watch out for American police. You want to stay away from them. That is an incredible thing to hear from somebody from Moldova. And I think the basic problem is this. Somewhere in the last 40 or 50 years, the nature of the relationship between citizens and police in America went from protective to predatory. things like forfeiture, fines and fees, the fact that most of us have committed a criminal offense. I actually counted up the number of criminal offenses I committed during the first 6 months of COVID. It was like 3 dozen. Most of it was teaching my kids archery in the front yard of our house, but nevertheless, virtually everybody in this room has committed a criminal offense for which you could be arrested, and if you haven't, you've certainly got property that could be forfeited. And the incentives are highly perverse, and that underscores the importance of having real accountability. And just to make one thing clear, when we succeed in eliminating qualified immunity, which we will, that doesn't mean that police will have strict liability and, every time they make a bad decision, they risk their house. That's not going to happen. Instead, what will happen is that just like the founders of this country intended, government officials will have to go in front of a jury of our fellow citizens and explain why they did what they did and why they think it was reasonable. If they succeed in persuading people that they behaved reasonably, they will be fine. If they don't, if it is apparent to a jury of their fellow citizens that they violated somebody's rights, they will be held accountable. What's more American than that?
Thanks so much, Clark. It's such an important point about accountability that, of course, Lakshmi touched on as well. I'm going to move to Aimable, and in terms of accountability, I think that is similar to your project, because what we were talking about with your project is informal work and the risk that poses to entrepreneurs and people trying to support themselves. Can you tell us about a story that represents what trade was like, cross-border trade was like, before your campaign? I know you and Patrick were talking to me about the river, the milk in the river. So perhaps you could share with the group.
Yeah, thank you so much. We have working in 9 borders in Burundi, which the 9 borders is borders between Burundi and neighbors countries. And each borders who have met fantastic women who have met a lot of barriers during their cross-trade borders. So let me share with you two of the many stories you have get from them. The first is called Ida. Ida is a woman who do their business between Burundi and DRC Congo. And there, before to start our campaign, Ida have a small capital between $25 to do their business. The business was eggs. She put eggs from Burundi to DRC Congo. And Ida, to be able to travel the border, because he have a little capital, Ida have tried to give 1 egg to each agent from legalization agents. It was 19 legalization agents there before to start our project. So either to be able to travel the border, either pay the different legalization agents 1 egg to be able to travel. That is the situation. The other story is the story from Nancy. Nancy is another woman who do business between Burundi and Rwanda, Burundi and Congo. Nancy, she have 4 children, but one the children have get these children from sexual harassment. When Nancy started to do their business, he didn't get a lot of money, but through by bringing fruit from Burundi to Congo, bananas, avocado, nanas. So some of the legalization agents at the border ask her the product. They say, I can't give my product because that is what I do to do business, to eat my family, to help my children to be able to access the school. So some of them say, okay, we don't need your product, but we need to be able to make sexuality to be able to travel. So a nursery today have kids from these harassments. That is the situation in Burundi.
Such a painful story to think about what people are dealing with in cross-border trade and having to engage in sexual bribes from government officials simply because of all of these really unjust regulations. One of the things that Aimable and I have talked about is sort of the idea of how important hope is in places that are poor. And Deirdre McCloskey talks about this. The ability to, believe that life can be better for your children is crucial to progress and to prosperity. So that brings me to Garrett at the Cardinal Institute, because like he said, West Virginia is known for being an impoverished state in the United States. It's known for not having much hope, and your project is called the Hope Scholarship Program. So can you tell us maybe a story about how this education choice that is such a hot topic right now is bringing hope to West Virginia?
Yeah, I think it's important for context that when you grow up in West Virginia, it's sort of one of the last bastions of where it's okay to make fun of someone, right? Or where it's sort of a late night comedic punchline. And I think over the generations, that really inculcates itself in the culture in West Virginia. You're growing up thinking, well, I don't really have much of a future. Or I'm simply going to follow in my parents' footsteps. We have a huge generational welfare issue in West Virginia as well. And to us, the most obvious inflection point on that, or kind of the most obvious lever, was we have to give kids a different opportunity. We have to make sure that they have the resources that will be required so they can go out and explore what a different future looks like. And I think we all know that the mechanism for that is education. And so, to us, so many West Virginians are sort of depressed. They have a hopelessness. We're also kind of the opioid crisis epicenter. And again, the education solution fixes, in our opinion, so many of these problems because, again, they're going to be able to have resources they've never had in the past. And so every kid in West Virginia is going to have almost $5,000 that they can take and purchase online tutoring, private school, tuition, educational therapies, different types of curriculum. Their worldview is going to be expanded by the power of the Hope Scholarship Program. And so I think over time, this is not going to be an education investment in West Virginia. It's going to be an economic investment as well. And so I think over the next 10 to 20 years, you're going to see a totally different state. And no longer will it be a comedic punchline, but folks will be looking at West Virginia for solutions.
Incredible. Yeah, and if you didn't know, the work that the Cardinal Institute has done on education choice in a landscape that's quite difficult, very strong teachers unions, very adamantly opposed to the work of the Cardinal Institute throughout the last several years, is being really used as an example across the country and is being replicated by think tanks across the country. Which brings me to Michael, because I know that the Libertas Institute's project, which is so innovative, I mean really just one of those things that is pushing the boundaries of what our network is up to, is being replicated across the country as well. So can you tell us about why it's so important for people? I know your application included a couple of stories about real people that were impacted by the work you're doing.
Sure. Let me tell you about a personal friend of mine. His name's Alex. He actually lives just a few miles from our office in Utah. Alex is an auto mechanic by trade, and so he very much saw that thing you guys get texts and calls about, extended vehicle warranties, those things are written in such a way to basically scam the consumer a lot of the time. And so his thought process was, could he create a company which would actually have extended vehicle warranties that would actually help people? If your transmission went out, your engine went out, if something happened like that, could you actually really get help? And so he took the healthcare sharing ministries model, where a group of people pools their resources and then kind of dips into the pot when needed, and applied that to vehicle warranties. And so he set up a company. He went to the regulators and said, "Hey, am I okay? What regulations do I need to follow?" And they said, "Oh no, you're not an insurance company. Don't bother us. You know, do your thing." And so a year goes by. He's having success. He's getting a lot of subscribers to his company, actually helping people. But a local car dealership starts to see what he's doing, and so they start to submit anonymous complaints to the insurance department. And so the insurance department comes after him, tells him he's got to do all these XYZ things that are extremely expensive or shut down. And so he went ahead and he shut down. And he paid everyone out, made sure that everyone was taken care of, lost his life savings, and shut down his company. And so this, for me, this is a very good example of how a lot of times with regulators, the answer is yes or no, and there's never a maybe. There's never an experimentation period, and so that's where the regulatory sandbox comes in. And the other reason I tell this story is because a lot of times, we think of all the cool innovations that are out there, Tesla and Uber and Airbnb, these companies that have millions of dollars of venture capital and a lot of lawyers and the ability to steamroll state and local governments, but our regular entrepreneurs, they don't have those resources. And so that's where we feel a regulatory sandbox would help your average business owner.
Thanks so much, Michael. As you can tell, these projects have real impact on real people, and that is what it's all about at Atlas Network, is encouraging all of us to think about how we can up our game. So I hope this panel is inspiring you today. So I think one of the things that I wanted to ask Mark is just sort of, could you go into just a little bit about, it was a little risky to dive into the Brexit issue. So you talked about that a bit at the beginning, but how do you make that calculation as a leader of a think tank? What goes into it? Tell us about it.
Yeah, the Brexit issue was toxic, really, in the United Kingdom. It was incredibly divisive. It divided families. It divided our own think tank. It was not obvious that there was a classical liberal position on Brexit. Some of us at the IEA were in favour of leave. Some of us were in favour of remain. My favourite media interview that I've done in my 12 years at the IEA was on CNN against one of my own members of staff. He was arguing for remain and I was arguing for leave. So what we decided to do, which I think was the right call, was not to have a position on whether Brexit was good or bad, but to treat Brexit as a fact that was going to happen, and then to decide how can we, I guess if you're a leaver, make the most of this great opportunity, or if you're a remainer, mitigate it. So we treated it as a fact. A decision has been made. We're not now going to sit on the sidelines. And again, Casey, as I was saying to you earlier, I think it's incumbent upon think tanks to talk about major events that are unfolding in front of us. I think it would have been an abdication of the IEA's responsibility to have had no public position on what should happen next. We were honestly divided. We could see arguments on both sides. But once the decision was made, I believe it's a public duty upon leading think tanks to actually map a pathway forward. And that was needed at the time because everybody in the UK was confused, distraught, upset, didn't know if it was really going to happen. And what was needed was a blueprint. And we brought that blueprint to stage in September 2018. And that has ended up actually being pretty much the policy the UK government has pursued.
Such a great reminder that it takes courage to do what we do and to do it well and to innovate and to create real impact. So I can't believe it, but we're running out of time already. We only have 2 more minutes. So I think what we'll do is we'll go through our panelists, and I'm going to ask them if you could give the groups in the room that are looking to be on stage, in the next few years, if you could give them a tip, a lesson that you learned through your project, 2 sentences max, what would it be? So who has a thought ready to go? Garrett.
Sure, I'll go. I would say be the invasive species. There's never a right time to get started on an issue. Recognize that through your very own efforts, you can create the change in your external environment, and you can reach forward into the future, pull back the right time, and your kind of wildest dreams on your policy victories will come true sooner than what you think.
Thank you so much, Garrett. All right, who's next? Anybody have a tip? Michael.
Here's a cheap tactic. It's not expensive. If you haven't ever participated in a co-creation process, look into it. Use it with your teams. Develop your ideas using that kind of a process. That's how we started our regulatory sandbox campaign.
Love that plug for co-creation. I know Alex is nodding her head over there. We're all about co-creation here at Atlas Network. Mark's up next.
There's a character called Rorschach in the superhero movie The Watchmen, and his catchphrase is, "Never compromise, even in the face of Armageddon." I'm not sure I'd take it that far, but my tip would be this. Once you've set your course and you are settled on it and you're sure it's the right thing to go, do not let things buffet you off that course. Stick to it, ride it out, appreciate that some waves are going to hit you and some problems are going to hit you, but stay true to that course. So basically, never compromise, even in the face of Armageddon.
Never give up, never surrender. I love it. Lakshmi, let's go to you now. What's your tip for the folks in the room looking to get on stage?
Thank you. And so I'll rely on David Hume's quote, who basically said that it's seldom that liberty of any kind is lost all at once. So I would really say look out for it, get started on it, and definitely kind of use technology, which is available now in abundance, to make sure that you build an excellent evidence-based case for championing for the cause that you're looking to champion.
Thank you so much, Lakshmi. Aimable, let's go to you.
So CDE have worked with more than 30,000 women working cross-strait borders. So we have learned a lot of things, but in short, we have learned that hope is very important for millions of people in Burundi to be able to get out of poverty. Thank you.
Thank you, Aimable. Yes, that deserves some applause. Yes. And finally, we'll close with Clark.
So I would say that two points that are related. Don't allow yourself to be distracted by the symptoms of a problem. Figure out what the essence of the problem is, the essence of the pathology, and distill your campaign down to the essence so that you identify the fundamental injustice that you are fighting against and make your opponents defend the indefensible.
Love it. Well, thank you everybody for being here with us today. I hope that you're as inspired as I am by these incredible individuals, and I hope you're thinking about questions that you want to ask them and things that you want to learn, because we have a meet and greet later today at 11 a.m. in the Poinciana Salon 1 and 2 ballroom. So please come join us, ask your questions. They're excited to talk with you, and thank you so much.